Craft matters. In small ways, like how a coffee is brewed. And in not so small ways, like how your money is cared for. Which is why for 160 years, UBS has elevated banking to a craft. Tailoring unique strategies that combine human expertise with the latest technologies. All happening across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs. With you at the heart of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 18th of November 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up,
we're going to work with you and we're going to take care of the one, it's really a lingering cloud. I would call it a lingering cloud that's over your head. We're going to see if we can get that straightened out.
But can North and South Korea resolve their differences themselves? We'll hear about an offer from Seoul to Pyongyang to dial down the tensions simply by talking. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, after France promises to supply Ukraine with fighter jets, we'll hear from the author of a report who claims that Ukraine needs a much better thought-out strategy for ending the war and beyond. And
I have been very intentional with my time, especially with the transition, of making sure that hoteliers know who I am, not for the sake of me, Natasha, but just for the reassurance of what I represent as CEO now.
Natasha Shafi, the new boss at the helm of Mr. and Mrs. Smith there. We'll hear about the succession of a brand which has endured, plus the papers too, and a trip to the Dubai Air Show. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else we're following in today's news. A UN resolution has been passed endorsing Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan. Key elements of a second phase have also been agreed upon. Canada's Parliament has narrowly voted in favour of Prime Minister Mark Carney's first budget, saving him from having to call fresh elections. And Saudi's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman visits the US President Donald Trump at the White House today. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, it has been more than 7 decades since North and South Korea signed an armistice agreement. But during that time, military tensions have not diminished. After all, the ceasefire was never followed up with a peace treaty. But in recent months, the persistent noisy rhetoric and rocket testing have been added to by what South Korea claims to have been incursions by North Korean troops. So now Seoul has proposed talks. And I'm joined in the studio by John Everard, former British diplomat, ambassador to North Korea. Good morning, John. Good to have you back with us.
Good morning, Emma.
What kind of incursions are we talking about?
Numerous small incursions. The fundamental problem is that the military demarcation line, that's effectively the ceasefire line agreed at the armistice back in 1953, was marked out at the time with a fairly thorough series of, I suppose you call them border posts, but that was a long time ago, and nobody has repaired these border posts in the meantime. They've rotted, they've been moved, they've fallen over, they've been eaten by goats, the kind of things that happens to sort of objects left in no man's land. And, of course, this means that the two sides now disagree on where exactly that line runs. The North Koreans, having declared South Korea to be a separate and hostile state a couple of years ago, have been busy fortifying their side of the border, and in so doing, keep crossing into territory that the South regards as its territory. The South responds by firing warning shots, drive the North Koreans back across their border, and the North Koreans angrily protest that they were on their own territory all the time. Hence the Southern suggestion that they sit down and talk about it. Chance of that happening? Flying pigs.
Indeed. Well, that was my next question. So you might have to elaborate a little on that.
The North has made very clear in its own vituperative way that it is not going to sit down with South Korea, that it regards the South Koreans as just a bunch of American toadies, and it is not going to discuss anything with them. So the suggestion of talks by the South is a piety. The South knows very well this isn't going to happen. It's part, incidentally, of a wider Southern scheme. The new president, Lee Jae-myung, came to office with a profound commitment to re-engaging with North Korea, and has been frustrated at every turn. The North has simply said no. This is, in that sense, another Southern attempt to get the Northerners to sit across a table.
Indeed, because if I'm right, President Lee's offer to the North Koreans was actually to have discussions without condition, that this was about as broad and as open as it could get.
That's correct, and the North has pooh-poohed even that. The other thing that the South has tried to do is they decided that if the North is not going to talk to them, maybe they can push Donald Trump into another summit with Kim Jong-un, which you're not sure what a summit with President Trump might actually produce, but at least it opens the door and it gives the South at least somebody to whom they can talk, who in their turn is talking to the North.
And it's interesting because at the beginning of the programme we played a clip of Donald Trump saying that we're going to work with both Koreas to take care of a lingering cloud. I mean, he dismissed it as just something quite residual. You've rolled... If you weren't in the room with me now, John's just rolled his eyes. That idea of a lingering cloud doesn't necessarily have much, doesn't consider it to have much heft.
That's right, lingering cloud. I think I don't think I'm the only North Korea watcher to roll their eyes at that phrase. This is much more than lingering cloud. This is a bitter and continuing conflict. The idea that Donald Trump can wade in and solve it is frankly risible, particularly as the North has made clear. They made clear when he was in South Korea for the APEC summit last month that they are not going to talk to Donald Trump. They're even less going to talk to him now that he's agreed to let the South have nuclear-powered submarines.
Explain a little bit more about the risk associated with these incursions. The fact remains that if nobody can decide on who should be allowed where, what is the possibility of something silly happening in the meantime when there is an outbreak, a burst of violence, and before you know it, we're in a situation which is much, much more serious?
It's impossible to quantify this risk, but it's not zero. The problem is that the North habitually, faced with any kind of confrontation, just doubles down, brings in more troops, shoots more. It's very rare for the North to actually back off. This, of course, would force the South's hand, which means that all it takes is for an overexcited local commander, probably a subaltern, to order his troops just to dig in and hold the ground. And you have a situation which would escalate quite rapidly out of control. It could probably be brought under control before you reach full-scale, major conflict, but it would be nasty and dangerous.
So there is a sense there from what you just said is that they would not be able to hold their, cool things down themselves were this to happen.
They would have to. I can't see anybody else doing it. But how they would do that isn't at all clear. As I say, the North is not talking.
Just listening to what you're saying in terms of the way that the North is behaving in the direction of the narrative in all this, is there a sense that the North actually is controlling an awful lot of what is happening here, that it seems to hold all the cards?
Not really. I mean, the North has got deep, deep problems and deep weaknesses that it is desperately trying to conceal. Where it feels it has the upper hand, it plays its cards with great aggression. And over the slightly uncertain military demarcation line, it clearly thinks so. And it's most unlikely that this spate of incursions is accidental. Subalterns on the front line are being ordered to cross into what the North knows very well the South regards as its territory.
And explain I think in the last few hours that a new agreement has been announced between South Korea and the United States to build a nuclear-powered submarine. The North has reacted, it has denounced it, as you would imagine. But that is clearly a sense that the South is absolutely publicly pressing on with its alliance with the United States.
Yes, this is very significant. Not just the last few hours. I mean, this has been building for a bit. It was essentially nailed down when President Trump was in South Korea for the APEC summit. But the deal is that the United States permits South Korea to build nuclear-powered submarines, not nuclear-armed, but nuclear-powered, using US technology. Big debate over where they're going to be built. President Trump has said they'll be built in Philadelphia. The Hanwha, the South Korean company, company that owns the shipbuilding facility there, has said that the facilities there just are not big enough. They can't build them there. They had to be built in South Korea. Nor is it clear how many submarines we are talking. But it's a big step forward. I mean, there aren't many countries that operate nuclear-powered submarines. South Korea is joining a big club. The other point here is that in exchange for releasing this technology, it's clear that the United States has got South Korea to promise to engage more widely in the US regional security agenda, Taiwan, China, and interestingly too, explicitly mentioned the threat from Russia. Now, up until now, the United States has kind of played this threat down. President Putin's famous relationship with President Trump, and has concentrated on China. That rhetoric is now shifting, and the United States is talking about a joint threat from China and Russia, which of course has implications for what happens over Ukraine apart from anything else. Big question is, why would the South want nuclear-powered submarines? If you are facing an adversary that is nuclear-armed with land-based missiles and with a huge land army, what is the point of building up your naval capability? That can only be in pursuit of the US regional agenda, not the South Korean one.
Indeed, because this is something that Washington has blocked for quite a long time, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Washington, for a long time, has been looking to build what it calls a security triangle between South Korea, Japan and the Philippines, though it's not clear anybody's told the Philippines this yet. And they effectively draw dotted lines on maps, which is the US-controlled area, and are looking for allies to patrol this and to keep it secure for them.
Because the number of countries which have nuclear-powered submarines is really small, isn't it? There's the US, Russia, China, Britain, France, India, superpowers.
That's right, yes. South Korea is joining a very elite club.
John Everard, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. That's John Everard, the former UK ambassador to North Korea. You're listening to The Globalist. Now, a special tribunal in Bangladesh has sentenced the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who's currently in exile, to death. The ruling concerns the government's crackdown on student-led protests in 2024, in which the UN estimates around 1,400 people were killed. Hasina remains free at the moment in India, while Bangladesh has requested her extradition. Many observers say that this is unlikely to happen because she's not going to return home to face her punishment. Well, to talk about this, I'm joined by Redwan Ahmed, who's a journalist based in Dhaka. Good afternoon, Redwan.
Good afternoon, Emma. Thank you for having me.
So just recap what happened in 2024, please.
So, as you know, in 2024, there was a violent uprising that basically overthrew the Sheikh Hasina's government. And it all stemmed from a government decision to award a preferential quota system in the government job scheme. So in Bangladesh, civil service jobs, which are like very sought after because, of unemployment and everything. So those government jobs are really lucrative to the fresh graduates. And the then system was used to give a very preferential treatment to the dissidents of the freedom fighters who took part in the Bangladesh's liberation war against Pakistan in 1971. And so the students, especially from the Dhaka University, they started protesting that decision that they say that was unfair. And what they wanted was a more fairer job quota system that given fair treatment and fair chances to everyone. So it stemmed from there, and then the government's mishandling of it, and the way the government had responded to those protests, and the heavy crackdown, the police brutality, and it's not only the police crackdown, but it also how the former ruling party supporters, especially the Awami League activists, the way they cracked down on the protesting students, that eventually led this student protest, which became a really popular uprising. And then, in early August in 2024, on the morning of the 5th of August, Sheikh Hasina had to flee because there was a massive popular uprising, and people were marching towards the residence. And that's when the security forces, especially the security forces guarding Sheikh Hasina, told her, it's time. They cannot protect her unless she leaves the compound. So then she took a flight to India from her residence. That's how the Awami League government fell, and yeah.
And this is where Sheikh Hasina is now. She's in India, and she has now been sentenced to death in absentia. What's been the reaction in Bangladesh?
Yes, now we know for sure that because both of the governments have confirmed that she is in India, and the trial happened in Bangladesh's International Crimes Tribunal. It is a domestic court, but it's a special trial that the government has constituted. Actually, the court was set up by Sheikh Hasina herself in 2010, to try the war crime tribunals, her political opponent Jamaat leaders back in like more than a decade ago. So yes, she has been tried in absentia because the government has sent formal extradition request to India because the two countries has treaties, but India has not publicly responded to it. But in private conversations, it is pretty clear that India is not giving her back. So the reaction on the streets is, there are, even in the courtroom was very jubilant. We saw, maybe I think it was also broadcasted live, that it was a packed courtroom with lawyers, journalists, and also family from slain protesters, injured protester. Everyone was in the courtroom. And as soon as the court handed down the verdict, people were like chanting, they erupted in claps, and so the similar mood echoed throughout the country as well, that most of the people, like many people, especially the families of slain protesters, and they really welcomed the decision, and they said this is the only punishment that they could think of. And Bangladesh is also the country where we still have the death by hanging for capital punishment, which is also like debated, and there were critics around it. But people think, I spoke to families of protesters, they think, like, some of them said Sheikh Hasina probably been hanged like 1,000 times for the crimes that she committed.
Well, just looking at how this plays out in the future, what if India does not hand her back?
So that is where it comes down to now, because it's pretty evident that India would not give her back, and I think people know it as well. So they say the primary priority of the interim government should be to try and bring her back. And that is diplomatically, that is a huge challenging task, even for India as well. If India keeps housing them now, especially because she is now a convicted felon in Bangladeshi court, and the prosecutors say they will ask the Interpol to issue a red notice based on the conviction. So that is something to see for the future, that what happens from now on, because it's pretty unclear that how it's going to unfold, especially regarding her return.
And indeed, and diplomatically, where does this leave the relationship between India and Bangladesh?
So the relationship between India and Bangladesh have been, especially under this interim administration, have already been very fraught. This two neighboring country which had a very warm relationship between, especially when Awami League was in power, has seen some downfall when the interim administration led by Yunus Muhammad Yunus has taken over. And in private conversations, the diplomats have told me that what India now wants to have a working relationship with this interim government, but they will not have a warm relationship with the interim government. With the election slated for the February next year, that might change when an elected government in power, especially a democratically elected government in power, India might have to redo or rethink how they want to move ahead with Bangladesh, because it is very close neighbors, and India, for its own interest, wants to have a more peaceful country, because for all this, their national security interest as well. So they are hopeful, and people are hopeful that things might change when there is a democratically elected government in power, and that's also the hope from our end as well.
Redwand Ahmed in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Still to come on The Globalist.
If you can get to Jumeirah in 5 minutes instead of 90 minutes, maybe you go there for lunch every day. That's the world we're looking to create.
We'll be heading to the Dubai Air Show. Stay with us on The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office Houseview, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's continue now today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio, Janelle Aldred, journalist, communications and media advisor here in the UK. Good morning, Janelle. How are you? How's your week been?
I'm really good, and we're matching.
We are. This is the joy of radio. You can't tell what we're wearing, and we're never going to tell you. It's a big secret. And you've been in Birmingham. You sort of like whiz up and down the country quite a lot in the UK, doing your thing. So thank you. So a busy week in London.
Yes, a busy week in London, meeting clients, chatting to people, and just having good conversations.
And looking at the papers.
Yes.
Thank goodness. What have you spotted?
So one of the first ones I spotted was a Chinese firm actually bought an insurer that was an insurer of CIA agents in the UK. In the US. Gosh, early. I've only had 2 coffees. But it's actually a really interesting one because, of course, the United States, like the UK, tightens its laws to prevent rivals from buying things in sensitive sectors. However, what they missed was a kind of a loophole which allowed a Chinese company, some might say the Chinese government, to buy an insurer that actually insures CIA and FBI agents personally in their work. So what that meant was then they had access to all of the personal information about, because as you can imagine, it's quite a unique insurance scheme. So they actually were able to buy it. Now, once it was spotted, it was then brought back by a US company. But that actually means that there was a time when they had access to the personal details of those kinds of intelligence workers.
So a bit of context here. The company was bought in 2015.
Yeah.
So this happened quite a while ago. And then how long was it? It wasn't that long ago, was it? It's like 2016, 2017 when this was all spotted and sorted out. But the question remains, how much damage was done before the US was able to tighten its laws?
And the thing is, what it seems, it was part of a longer play by Beijing to actually invest in different companies around the world, especially in sectors that they wanted to, I don't want to use the word infiltrate, because as the article kind of goes on to say, is that actually some of these things are just Chinese companies who actually want to make money and so are buying companies up around the world. But it does seem like there is a longer strategic play to basically inveigle themselves around the world in different things. And it's 10 cutting edge industries that they have outlined in kind of a 10-year plan from 2000 to 2023. So it's actually really interesting that they were, 1, able to do it, 2, it was spotted and brought back, but 3, it does open up lots of questions about what are the geopolitics behind this and what does that mean going forward?
Indeed. I mean, this list that's being published about the 15 wealthy countries which are given Chinese investments or on the receiving end of Chinese investments. The top 10 is US, Australia, UK, Switzerland, Singapore, Germany, Saudi Arabia, Canada, France, etc., etc. These are countries which geopolitically take a stance against China, and it is that perpetual problem, isn't it? That headache of the fact that Chinese money is important, Chinese trade is essential. China is also seen as a strategic rival.
And it's interesting because they were talking about figures of billions. So I think the US, it's 200 and the UK, it's 60. That is not an insignificant amount of money to be in someone's back pocket for, essentially, in terms of what you owe them. And then when you think about things like tariffs and things that get overlaid onto that, it all actually becomes quite intricate and difficult. So I lend you, you lend to me, I've got something you need, I take it away from you, I make things hard for you, you make things hard for me. What if they tomorrow just said, payback on the loan? We literally couldn't do it.
Let's move on to news that broke overnight here in the United Kingdom, but obviously this was end of play in Canada. Mark Carney has succeeded in narrowly pushing through his budget. And there were 2 elements to this, weren't they? One of them is it massively increases the fiscal deficit because there is a need to respond to Donald Trump's trade wars. There is a need to shore up the military and also invest in Canada's housing programs. But personally, for Carney, had this failed, there was a very high chance that he was going to have to call elections.
And that would be the second election in less than a year. So that would have been quite devastating and also disruptive. But when we talk about a narrow, it was 170 to 168 was the vote. So we're talking literally about 2 votes in it for this to pass. And so it says that the budget could eventually be approved. But when you look at a narrow win like that, you know it's not going to be plain sailing to get through to the next stages, because it's not kind of an all in. And he is proposing doubling the fiscal deficit. And that's actually going to be, again, quite a big deal in terms of their budget, but it means that the budget also doesn't have as many austerity measures as some had feared because of the task. I can't speak this morning, the task they're taking, but actually also the other thing.
Warm up a bit,
but recent polls also said if elections were held now that he'd still retain power. So I think that's a really interesting move. But again, narrow defeats mean lots more bargaining, lots more back and forth. And so, yes, they would retain power, but it does mean that he's on borrowed time to make something happen.
And indeed, the one of the points that is raised in across many of the papers is this is not just a narrow victory for Carney. This is a defeat for the Conservative, the right of centre opposition Conservative Party, because they are still in a mess following the last elections. That their leader Pierre Poilievre, who lost his seat and then regained another one, is actually subject to a formal review of his performance. So the fact remains is actually that Carney could or is capitalising on the fact that the opposition's in a mess.
And his Liberals are still a few seats short of a majority. And so they did need some opposition legislators to back the budget or abstain. And a handful did abstain. So, yes, he's not in a great position. But I think it's a lot like politics around the world that you see. He is not in a great position, but his opposition's in a worse position. So he's then able to narrowly kind of get away with using the distraction of what's going on the other side to get through the things that he needs to.
Let's head to Vietnam for the next story you've spotted.
Yeah, so Vietnam is going to prosecute a journalist for anti-state activities. And it's actually really interesting that this is not the first time that this has come up in recent times, because just last month they also had a BBC journalist that had returned home to do a visa and they didn't let them leave the country. But it is going to be an interesting one because there is a Berlin-based journalist and news website editor. He's known for writing critical reports about the Southeast Asian nation. Today, the coffee.
And
it's accusing him of anti-state activities. So what it is, they are clamping down on journalists who are critical. It's interesting because the website he writes for is not actually accessible in Vietnam. So it's interesting that they actually are clamping down on such things. The journalist that was going there to renew a visa, review a passport. And at that time, Keir Starmer was asked to raise it with the Prime Minister who was coming to visit at the end of October. So it is interesting that the press freedoms are being clamped down on in such a way that even if you're not writing something actively or in the country, they are still willing to prosecute, expel, stop you from leaving.
Finally, let's clear your lovely brain with a piece of Bach, because if there's anything that's going to wipe away the cobwebs and set you on the right footing, it's going to be a piece of Bach, obviously.
No,
and they've found new pieces of Bach, which is huge.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story because it's a piece that hasn't been performed for 320 years. It's an unknown organ works. And, whether or not you're a fan of hearing organ pipes play, there's something quite majestic about the way that they work. And actually, it had caught the attention of a researcher when he was cataloguing some of the manuscripts. And then he found this piece, and it's called the Chaconne in D minor, BWV 1178, and in G minor.
Quick, that's an easily memorable number.
in 1979. Catchy. So they were undated, unsigned, and it was 30 years actually to confirm that the pieces were indeed penned by him, because it was one of his students that had actually written it down. But they're said to be of high quality, and it was actually played for the first time where Bach is buried.
In Leipzig. Janelle Aldred, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now a quick look at some of the other stories we're following here today. A UN resolution has been passed endorsing Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan. Key elements of a second phase have also been agreed upon. Mr. Trump has proposed a board of peace, a transitional governing body for the territory that he would chair himself. Canada's Parliament has narrowly voted in favour of Prime Minister Mark Carney's first budget, saving him from having to call fresh elections. His budget proposes doubling the fiscal deficit to counter Donald Trump's tariffs and to fund defence and housing programmes. And Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman visits the US President Donald Trump at the White House today. The de facto ruler of the Gulf state will use the meeting to deepen decades-old cooperation and security. And those are the headlines on Monocle Radio. 9:29 in Kyiv, 8:29 in Zurich, 7:29 here in London. Now, Ukraine has been promised more military help from France. In a letter of intent, which is a political commitment rather than a purchase deal, Kyiv could receive up to 100 French-made Rafale warplanes over the next 10 years. But this is just one part of a wider and deeper strategy that Ukraine needs, not only to beat its Russian invaders, but to keep the peace afterwards. Well, Jacob Parakilas is a research leader for RAND, Europe's Defence and Security Research Group. RAND has just published a 5-point list of what is needed, both domestically and for the international community to do to ensure the survival of Ukraine in the long term. Good morning, Jacob.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. So you have been commissioned, or your organisation has been commissioned, to write reports and effectively sort of cast a long view for Ukraine. How did this report come about?
This emerged from a set of conversations that we had with the Ukrainian Ministry of Digital Transformation, which is an interesting format because the Ministry of Digital Transformation wasn't originally a war-fighting ministry. It was set up by the Zelensky government in the distant past of 2019 to provide better digital services for Ukrainians, e-voting, car registration, that sort of thing. But after the full-scale Russian invasion in February of 22, the organization made a sort of hard right-hand turn into being a warfighting support organization. So leveraging emerging technology to improve Ukraine's odds on the battlefield, because of course Ukraine is a third the size of Russia, more or less, and needs to innovate in order to be able to preserve its sovereignty and protect itself against Russian invasion.
And this is where you come in, and you come in with this doctrine.
That's right, because what we can't do for Ukraine is tell them how to fight day to day on the battlefield. No one knows better how to fight against a conventional adversary like Russia at this point better than the Ukrainians. They are the undisputed masters of that topic. What we can do, what organizations based outside of Kyiv can do, is sit back with the luxury of not being bombed every night and say, okay, this is the long term thing. This is how to think, beyond just the immediate urgency of defending yourself and your homes every day, how to sort of set yourself up to build a defense structure, build the policies and the approaches to defense that'll be effective in the long term.
Indeed, and without giving too much away to the Russians, what did you tell them to do?
Well, so one thing they were very clear about, because they've had this evolution. They started as a post-Soviet republic, and they inherited a military structure and a military way of doing things, a doctrine, from the Soviets. And when the Russians launched the initial invasion, the sort of soft invasion, although it was anything but soft, in 2014, they very quickly found that, as they frequently say, a small Soviet army can't beat a big Soviet army. So they imported NATO doctrine, NATO ways of doing things from the US and Britain and Canada principally.
And just explain, lay that out a little bit more, what that actually looks like. So how do you import a NATO doctrine, and actually what does that mean and look like?
So doctrine is a little bit like, I'm using the term advisedly, it's a little bit like an instruction manual. So if you are a military commander and you're given orders to take a town, right? You have a certain number of forces. The enemy is in front of you. You're ordered to take the town away from them. Doctrine is kind of the way that you would approach things. Do you start by bombarding the town with artillery and then rushing towards it with tanks? Do you try to encircle the town and cut off its lines of communication? There are various ways of approaching a problem, and doctrine gives you guidelines. And the Soviets had a very specific way of doing it, which was basically, massing artillery, blasting the target, and then marching towards it en masse. That doesn't work very well when the other side is bigger and has more artillery than you do, as the Ukrainians found out very quickly in 2014. So they switched tacks. They learned to do things from the Americans and the Brits and the Canadians. But then, the war has changed, especially since 2022. The proliferation of emerging technology that's principally small drones, but also electronic warfare and all kinds of advanced things that weren't relevant, but weren't nearly as prevalent on the battlefield in 2014. And that's where the Ministry of Digital Transformation comes in, because these are not the sort of people who've been fighting for 20 years and have a set way of doing things. These are a group of very young people who come from computer engineering and software design and, this broad range of civilian backgrounds. And they have different ideas of how to integrate technology into fighting forces.
And dealing with a group of people who are not, as you say, military fighters. They are civilians. And they are having to, dare we say it, take a dynamic approach, which is effectively going along and trying to work out what you're doing. How does that change the way that you approach the work, given the fact that you're dealing with people in real time who are not military minded, which is ordinarily very, very different from the approach that you could take when everything is calm and the guns are silent?
It relies on, I think, being able to not only think slightly laterally, but use a different vocabulary. So one of the things that we propose in the first, that we've published 2 of the 4 reports. There's some other smaller ancillary pieces coming over the next few weeks as well. But one of the things that we proposed was that the doctrinal system be based around a wiki model, so that you give everyone with equities on the battlefield. So frontline troops, commanders, people working on logistics, but also people doing hardware and software development, because the situation on the front changes frequently enough that you need the people building drones and the people programming them to be able to update their hardware and software very quickly to take advantage of or avoid being overcome by new Russian tactics, jamming, electronic warfare, that kind of thing. So you give them all a stake in it. Instead of having a cell of particularly smart military officers who just sit down and write the doctrine, you spread the writing process out as broadly as possible to preserve this unique sort of horizontal grassroots system that's made Ukraine's defense so effective.
What have you learned in all this process about how to plan and run and win a war that you didn't know before the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
I think the thing that really struck me is the degree, it's something of a repetition of what I just said, but the degree to which, especially in the Ukrainian instance, success on the battlefield is not just a function of leadership. And I don't mean to dismiss the idea that leadership is important. It's clearly important. Incompetent leaders can lose winnable battles. Competent leaders can win easily losable battles. But especially in the Ukrainian instance, one thing that we've heard over and over from a variety of sources is the degree to which information sharing sort of horizontally. So, the executive officer of one battalion is friends with the commander of the next battalion up the line, and they're chatting with each other on Signal and just saying, hey, by the way, the Russians have started doing X. You need to do Y to stop them. Those networks, those sort of, if you're trying to map what's effective, just looking at the org chart and saying, okay, well, this is the commander and he's quite good, so it'll go well, misses a lot of the point, because a huge amount of the resiliency of an army or the resiliency of a defense, because it's not just a military operation, it's also how private industry and civil society and, the other agencies and informal groupings within society work together to sort of bind the country together in unity.
Finally, looking more broadly, what does the changing nature of the support that Ukraine is given, either from the European Union and also from the Trump administration in Washington, how does that get factored into a doctrine?
Well, in theory, doctrine should be usable regardless of the technology. But what we heard from the Ukrainians and what we've seen is that they're increasingly capable of building what you might call lower end equipment. So small drones, missiles, small arms, the things that infantry soldiers and small units fight with. They're not particularly close to having the industry necessary to build things like these Rafale and Gripen fighter jets that we've seen Zelensky sign memorandums of understanding to acquire. So the big ticket, high end stuff is still going to be necessary. And it's up to Europe to figure out how to deliver them quickly, because it's all well and good to say, here are 150 fighter jets. But if they're not delivered until 2035, that's a very, very, very long time.
Jacob Parakilis from RAND Europe's Defence and Security Research Group. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
It is 10:39 a.m. in Nairobi to hear from our correspondent Navina Kotor. She's here with a roundup of everything that's happening where she is. Good morning, Navina.
Nice to be back.
And how are things in Nairobi this morning?
Things were supposed to be rainy, but we've had a very kind of erratic rainy season, so actually it's quite sunny and warm.
Thank you for the weather update. Right, what news from where you are?
Well, I thought we look at what's happening in Mali for the last couple of weeks. Especially the capital has been the subject of a fuel blockade that has been imposed by the Al-Qaeda affiliate JNIM. Bamako has been cut off from fuel and other supplies coming in from Senegal, coming in from Côte d'Ivoire. And it really is an unprecedented situation in that, Mali has battled militants, Al-Qaeda affiliated militants in the past, but primarily in the north. But this very simple tactic of cutting off the capital from supplies seems to be, effective in that there are now suggestions that an open criticism of how this military government has been handling them. And there's some suggestions that the government might have to negotiate with the militants.
And this negotiation could lead to what?
That's a very interesting question. I think the outcome of these negotiations, if they are already happening or if they are to happen, is unclear. There are suggestions that the group might be interested in holding territory, that the government might be able to, it's one thing the government might be able to offer them is to hold some territory and for the government and its troops to retreat from these areas. Most analysts seem to agree that even if JNIM manages to take the capital, which would be unprecedented in the region, there are not enough fighters to hold the capital and to run the country. So it looks more likely that there will be some kind of trade-off in the months that will have to be negotiated.
Okay, let's move to Tanzania, a country which up until recently has been peaceful and democratic transition has happened quite easily. This has not been the case in the last few weeks, has it?
Yes, not at all. I mean, we know Tanzania from the Serengeti, from safaris, from Zanzibar beach holidays, but the election that happened at the end of October really tarnished the country's reputation as a sort of a country of stability, a safe place to go for tourists. The allegations are that the president, who secured 98% in the election, cracked down too hard against people who were protesting against opposition parties being banned from running in the election, that bystanders and people were killed, that the security services persecuted people, have abducted people. There are even talks about mass graves and about foreign troops being part of this crackdown. The British papers are calling it the Tiananmen moment for Tanzania. There has also been very open criticism by the United Nations, who are calling for an investigation. And I think the president has sort of is now trying to backtrack and has offered some kind of reconciliation process. But I think very few people are convinced that this is going to lead anywhere.
Indeed. I mean, is the public going to buy this?
No, it does. I don't think it's very hard, to be honest. It's very hard to say if the public buys anything because it's impossible for foreign journalists, almost impossible for foreign journalists to travel there unless you report about electric cars and new railway lines being opened. It's very difficult to cover political stories there, to speak to people. People who were filming protests have been arrested and charged with treason. So it's a very tense environment that I think even very experienced human rights organizations are finding hard to operate in. So the question of how many people actually died around these protests the numbers range from a few hundred to a few thousand. And I think it is something that we will probably hear about more in the coming weeks and months as people are working on this.
Now, Monocle's Nairobi correspondent Navina Koto, thank you so much for joining me on the line. You're listening to The Globalist. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the luxury hotel directory, was founded in 2003 by James and Tamara Lohan and has evolved into a global travel club with more than 1 million members. It was acquired by Hyatt in 2023 and it's been opened up to the group's 51 million World of Hyatt loyalty scheme members. Well, this summer, the founders handed the reins to the longtime colleague and now CEO Natasha Shafi, who joined Monocle's Tom Webb at Midori House to talk about her 6 months in the position and the year ahead.
I would say it's been a year of many chapters. There is a beautiful brutality to business, which I guess I really enjoy. Personally, it's been a huge one for me. So I stepped into the role of CEO here at Mr. and Mrs. Smith in April. I've been in the business for 20 years and it was a real milestone and privilege to, I guess, take the keys from the founders and be the first employee leading Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So a real moment for me personally. With now, with having a great supporting parent company in Hyatt, it feels like an opportunity for us to embrace new scale in a way that's exciting. But it's certainly been a very choppy year, I guess, for luxury travel in particular, where with all that's happening in the macro kind of environment, it certainly doesn't mean that luxury travel isn't affected, of course, by that. But there is a resilience to it that we've been very lucky to kind of navigate as well. And having that self-awareness and, I guess, courage to face what we face when it comes from a trading perspective, but more importantly, having the kind of tactical levers and entrepreneurial spirit that's still very important to Smith to make sure that we navigate those waters through 2025. So it's not over yet. As I keep telling the team, we've still got 6 weeks until Christmas. Is that right? So we'll be, making sure we make each and every day count. But it's definitely been a year where I feel I've had probably 20 years smashed into one.
So a lot of change. Speaking of change, there is a parent company, the World of Hyatt. How has that moved the business around, or is it in fact business as usual?
So, being, I guess, one of the original founding kind of team members, one thing to say is that good entrepreneurs and business owners understand when they have reached the potential of the business under their leadership and their stewardship, but more importantly, have the broad shoulders and, I guess, maturity to understand having a strategic acquisition in our case is actually only going to benefit the business. The inception, the idea that they've created, and make sure that it kind of lives for another 20, 30, 50 years into the future under kind of experience on a different level. And so from our perspective, we are very lucky in terms of our parent company. They've acquired Mr. and Mrs. Smith, a different brand, a very boutique and luxury, business that they've not had bought before, and they've let us be who we are. And that's really important and very wise of them, because they don't want to make sure we lose our magic and the things that we do really well. But they certainly have that kind of lovely arm around our shoulder to say, okay, but here's a big world now that we can embrace together without ever kind of compromising our curation and our brand standards. So for that, I always use the word evolution, and I mean that very intentionally. It is an evolution for the business. It's not forgetting where we came from, and it's not changing for the sake of changing, but it's embracing this new opportunity and this level of scale. So far, really beautiful relationship and a great opportunity for the next stage of our potential.
And is that the feeling from the consumer experience as well? Are customers saying it hasn't changed? In fact, it's enhanced my relationship with the brand?
I don't think many people really know we're acquired. And I think I would say that's a measure of success in some ways, because it is testament to our parent company doing exactly what they're demonstrating for us internally, which is letting us live and breathe the brand and the business as it began and as it is understood today. So from a consumer perspective, I think very few would actually even know that, we've been acquired. We have, though, new customers, meaning World of Hyatt members can now, book Mr. and Mrs. Smith hotels. Again, we don't necessarily deal with those World of Hyatt members. They're looked after by the kind of Hyatt team, if that makes sense. But our hotels are now getting a variety of customers staying at their hotels. And so that's the, navigation, the opportunity for the hotels as well, that we're opening up new markets. But that's, the place where our customer would actually feel the difference.
Now, we're in a very privileged position talking to you because you do have that 20 years of vision and wealth of experience with the brand. If we're going to go back 20 years, are there still properties, are there still hotels that share the ethos of the brand that you're still with? And what are those values?
Yeah, so one thing that I'm very, intentionally doing is making sure that we're visiting. I can visit. My dream would be able to go to all the hotels around the world and say hello. And I hope that dream will come true one day. But I have been very intentional with my time, especially with the transition, of making sure that hoteliers know who I am, not for the sake of me, Natasha, but just for the reassurance of what I represent as CEO now and what is not going to change, as I said, and what will be protected, but also the opportunity that they have. So I went to go and visit Limewood, one of the original Mr. and Mrs. Smith hotels that joined, 15 years ago, I think it was actually. And they are solely independent with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And what I mean by that is we're the only other person apart from themselves that looks after their distribution of their rooms and, making sure that guests stay with them. And so going there and visiting the property, which is remarkable and beautiful and very special, and speaking to the MD, I believe it was, and the general manager, and understanding what is really important to them and how by meeting me and understanding our next journey that we're going to protect that specialness. They don't necessarily want to take on all of the wonderful things that Smith can offer them. And that's okay. It's that human connection. So yes, there are lots of properties that, have been in our collection for a long time and will remain to be, because that partnership is the most important thing. And understanding that as each of our hotels are very different in terms of our curation, there isn't a cookie cutter setting and criteria. It's about making sure we go and visit each of them and experience that hotel and represent that hotel in its true, trueness and, identity. It's also knowing that each hotel has its own needs. And that relationship that we've built over 20 years with them, and more importantly, will continue to nurture in this next stage, will still remain. And they don't have to conform to X, Y, and Z. It's about making sure we fulfill the needs that they really desire us to fulfill, and do so in a way that Smith has always done that, which is very human and very personal to them.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith's new CEO, Natasha Shaffi there, talking to Monocle's Tom Webb. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Finally on today's programme, with the time here in London, 7:52, we head to the Dubai Air Show. It's begun. More than 200 aircraft on display, more than 1,500 exhibitors. Trying to cover it all is Monocle's Gulf correspondent, Inzamam Rashid. Good morning, Inzi.
Morning, Emma. Yeah, trying to cover it all is the right term to use. Probably running around like a headless chicken is even better. That literally describes my life right now here on the tarmac at Dubai Air Show.
Excellent. That's the spirit. We're very grateful for all your energy and commitment and wearing out of shoe leather. So you're on the tarmac in Dubai. Just paint a picture for us, would you please?
Look, this is an absolute spectacle. This air show, it is really incredible. It's got everything you could ask for as an aviation geek, but also as someone who isn't, someone who's just a frequent traveler, if you came along, would just be fascinated by the display. The choreography of the air show is brilliant. Yesterday, there was a visit from the ruler of Dubai, his son, the Crown Prince, and also the ruler of Abu Dhabi as well. They officially launched the air show here. And we had a flurry of deals as well. Now, I think it's important to first say what this air show is focusing on. They're talking a lot about flying taxis, which are expected to come here early 2026. But also, this air show, I think, kind of hangs in the balance when it comes to Airbus and Boeing. Of course, those two big plane companies who have had very difficult times over the last couple of years, and whether the delivery of some of their newest models will actually, they haven't made it on time, but will actually come very soon, is what has been overshadowing this air show. But that confidence, particularly in Boeing, was really refueled yesterday by Emirates. Emirates announced a $38 billion order for an additional 65 Boeing 777-9 aircrafts, giving the US plane maker a much needed boost, I guess, after the plane's debut was postponed to 2027. So confidence in Boeing and Airbus is really being talked about at the air show, as well as flying taxis, which have been on display. And that's something that the UAE in particular are very excited about the future. Other things to notice as well that are on display: Riyadh Air, the new premium airline from Saudi Arabia. They're debuting here at the Dubai Air Show as well, in all purple colour. They're really showing off their interiors, the uniforms, and they've got a helicopter on site, which will allow people, if they want to take a helicopter as soon as they come off a Riyadh Air plane, then they can book it all under the Riyadh Air concierge app, and it means that you can get mobility across the country as and when needed.
Okay, so lots of bit to sort of go through in a very small amount of time. Talk to me about air taxis, because I know that you've been talking to organisations at the air show about the fact that this is pretty feasible now.
It really is that, yeah, it's very much going to be a reality here by early 2026. There's two companies, Archer Aviation and Joby. Now, Joby's looking after the one here in Dubai, and Archer Aviation is working with the government in Abu Dhabi. And there is genuine competition between these two to see who can be the first one to launch these air taxis. But I've been speaking to Nikhil Goel. He's from Archer Aviation. And I asked him a bit about why there is an actual need for flying taxis right now.
Time is the most valuable thing we have, and no matter how much money you have, you can't get more of it. And so we have started to see, especially with these growing populations, is more and more people are spending more and more time stuck in traffic. I myself spent probably 3 to 4 hours in the back of a car yesterday going to and from the air show. And it's only getting worse. Our cities are getting more crowded, but our transportation systems are getting longer, they're getting more congested, and we still travel in 2 dimensions. It simply cannot scale, and you've got to start planting the seeds for 5 to 10 years down the road. And so that's exactly what we're doing here at Archer, and I think that when we do that, we are going to one day change the way people live and work. You know, if you can get to Jumeirah in 5 minutes instead of 90 minutes, maybe you go there for lunch every day. That's the world we're looking to create.
It's Archer's Nikki Goel there talking to Imdi at the Dubai Air Show. OK, you have a scant minute to tell us what you're doing today. Go.
A lot of running around. We're going to be speaking to the Vice President of Boeing Global, Dr. Brendan Nelson, to get his take on the deliveries and whether they'll get there on time, and the new orders that are made. And also we'll be watching what's happening up in the sky, because plenty of acrobatics, red arrows here on the tarmac here in Dubai. And of course we are at the site of what will be the new mammoth airport in a few years' time, DWC, which will see more than 150 million passengers come through its door when it's built.
Inzamam Rashid doing all the hard work for us at the Dubai Air Show. Thank you so much for joining us on the line. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests, and thanks to the producers, Vincent McAviney, Tom Webb and Chris Chermak. Our researcher was Joanna Moser. Our studio manager was Lily Austin, with editing assistance from Christy O'Grady. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. I'll be back with the Globalists at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Advice is our craft.